years we had different governments in those 4 countries. And it happens that ruling parties in 4 countries, they have different visions of regime, of as well social issues. So we cannot speak in the Visegrad region about one line. We are not small European Union. We don't have common legislation. All countries, they are governed as chosen parties see the future of those countries. As I said, as the Visegrad Fund, we are focused on very local level of collaboration, and our scope is to bring people together and exchange their experiences, opinions, and to build something together. Albanian Minister of Foreign Affairs mentioned yesterday evening that there were no women in the Albanian politics during communist time. We had very similar situation in Visegrad countries. In theory, there was emancipation. Women were equal, and we had, on paper, equal rights. I was shocked, for example, when I studied and I discovered that in France, only in 52, women didn't need anymore husband's allowance to work. Till 52, they needed to have a paper from their husbands that they can go work somewhere. In Poland, it was already impossible to
Sounds
think about
like
something.
Children going to school with a
Exactly.
parent's note. Yeah.
Exactly. So in this sphere, it was emancipation, but in practice, women worked in on less paid positions, and they have never been bosses. We had some MPs in the parliament, but they are, well, just to say, we have women there, and we don't we haven't had any important female persons on high positions. We are in the Visegrad region in the process of changing. I'm coming from Gdańsk on the north of Poland, and Sweden is just above. It's just 40 minutes flight. So for my part of Poland, Sweden was in these terms point of reference and model to follow. So we are, as a Visegrad region, on our path. After the fall of communism, what was as well interesting that among opposition, we had very strong opposition against communism. There were a lot of women very engaged in fighting against communism. But when the change came, again, all positions were taken by men, and those women stayed on local level, just supporting male figures. I would like to refer to what has been said personally as a woman, based on my experience, that speaking about having more women on influential positions, we have to work from the very low familial level on our society. And it's our role as women to grow up our sons in spirit of respect for women. As mothers, we should ask our sons to clean after dinner, as we do in case of our daughters. And without this very background level, we will not educate men. I very agree with this opinion that emancipation is not only about women, it's as well about men, to let them have emotions and to grow up them in the spirit of respect for women. I see leadership in 2 dimensions, psychological one and sociological one. Psychological one is this something that we have sometimes, and then we have this leadership spirit.
Sure.
We cannot say that everybody has it. We have individuals having those capacities, but very often these capacities cannot be developed because society kills from the very beginning this kind of attitude. If the small girl in the first grade hears that she's not enough skilled because she's a girl, that the most important thing in her life is to find a husband, that she needs to marry the first boyfriend she meets, then we will not create conditions to have independent, powerful women on high positions. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you. And if I may just add a couple of things, I think that we have many great women in the Balkans, since we are in the Balkans. And I think being that our countries are relatively small, we need to share those examples of leadership across our countries. So if a woman is a leader in Serbia, we need to know about her here as well, and vice versa, everywhere in the Balkans. So, Ms. Raicevic, and I will continue in this line, and because your line of work also makes you closer to these issues. How do we make sure that we end violence and injustice towards women? I know it sounds almost unachievable because we've been talking about it so long, but I want to believe that this is possible.
Definitely not an easy question, but I think that a lot of answers we already get from our colleagues here talking about gender roles. And I was quite surprised to see that gender roles in Japan are quite similar to gender roles in the Western Balkans. So I guess the patriarchy is something that is universal, and I think that we should actually change the way we perceive, of course, the role of women and men in the society, but also we should also change our attitude to power. I would say that, at least I can talk about this region, power is something that is overappreciated. Power is something that many people are streaming for. Not only men, women, of course. And I think that we should change that attitude. And again, I will return to what I previously said. We should be more empathetic and think more about other people, but also strive to fulfill our own interests and hopes and potentials. So there is a huge work, of course, and we need, of course, to change the whole educational system. That is particularly important for changing our reality. And I would say that our educational system is very traditional. Not to mention that mostly women work in education because it's usually a lower paid job, etc. But at the same time, we have our curriculums that are not acknowledging women's contribution to the history. So once I opened the history book of my son, and I could see that women were mentioned only 3 times. Once in some commercial, old from the previous century. Another picture was illustrating women from the national movement from the Second World War. And the third one was also a woman without a name from some village carrying a huge burden on her back. So I think that these kind of images that are actually very often overwhelmed our children and ourselves can create, of course, a false perspective of what women are capable of doing. And not to mention, of course, the new trends that are, again, different in a way that they actually strive for perfection of women. Yeah. Not only physical one, but also the one that women needs to be capable of everything, to have a successful career, to have a family, to be a mother even if she's not prone to do something like that. And it's really too much. We should be aware that we need to choose what's best for ourselves and not to just adapt for what the society needs. And it's not easy. It's much easier, of course, to say that and to take lectures about it, but to change ourselves. And yeah. I think one of the great ways is actually to try to reach in ourselves what is important for us and to stick to that, and also to try to be as much as brilliant as we can to the influences that are actually putting women into the private sphere and giving her some not only negative but also some falsely positive characteristics, like women is caring, empathic, thinking about others. Not all women are the same, not all men are the same. There are empathic men, empathic women. We should acknowledge our differences and, of course, try to create better society for us.
Thank you. A few years ago, we conducted a social experiment, which we filmed. And we had many people come to this, and they were young and old, and men and women. And I would describe them a successful business person. And then I would ask them to say how they pictured this person. Or it would be a sports person. Or, and every time they described back to me men. You know, he has a mustache, and he's big, and he's tall, whatever. And I was always talking about women, about specific women that live amongst us. And I hope that has changed. That was probably 6-7 years ago. But there is this image that's ingrained in the minds of children, that people of success, people of power, people of decision making, and they come up with a person who's usually male. And I'm hoping that this is something that would change. And I want to bring this to you, Mrs. Jovanovic. How do we make sure that changes? You've worked with a woman who's now Prime Minister of Serbia, as Mrs. Barnabic, and being yourself a leader also. What does it take to lead? What does it take to break these barriers, these perceptions as well? Is there, I know this is more than one question at once, but is there more than one way to get to the top? Or does each of us have their own style of reaching there without being power thirsty, as it was just mentioned before?
Well, I can only agree with all that was said in the panel and with my great colleagues and peers here. And just to single out a few concluding messages. So when it comes to leadership, to me, it's about growth that happens when you support others. Mm-hmm. And this is growth that happens in an organization, in a country, or in a person. And I experienced all of this firsthand with NALED, and this is what I'm gladly sharing with others, hoping that it can inspire others to follow. And in doing so, what are the usual obstacles is when someone is different on in any way, be it their sex, if they're a minority, which is usually with women in leadership, or their orientation or religion or any other kind of difference, because it usually invites bias and frequently labeling. And some of this was also mentioned in the panel. This is something that we frequently see even nowadays, because women are expected to be to assume a lot of roles and to be successful, equally successful in each one of those. And if they're only successful in business, then they're usually criticized for not being mothers, or not being married, for example. And this is the labeling that we try to fight against, because usually people who make such comments, they have no clue what they're talking about, because they don't know the reasons why the status of these people is such. And I also encountered those on many occasions. So I believe that we all in this conference room agree that this kind of labeling should stop, because it's really disheartening and discouraging for many young girls who are starting their careers and trying to be at their best, and understanding that they're enough if they behave well, if they treat others nicely. They don't have to serve. They don't have to serve to deserve love. And this is usually the upbringing method that we still adhere to in our countries and also in the educational system. And this is something that we are trying to change. One of the ways to change it is by giving a different example and also building communities of practice. This is what works well in our experience, and this is what we are promoting left and right, because at least in Serbia, there is a small number of organizations, professional associations that gather women. It's usually a male advantage still, and it also has other reasons why women usually have little time or cannot make it to build a family and a career and hang out together. But this is something that could really make a difference, because this kind of mutual support is what also brings out new leaders, or at least brings them to light. And this is, again, another opportunity for us to build such a community of the participants of the conference and try to encourage some new leaders that are probably emerging in this room and in each one of our countries. So thank you once again for inviting me. I'm really privileged to be on your ranks, and I'm looking forward to meeting each and every one of you.
Thank you. Professor Gray, in your paper, The New Orientalism, the Influence of Media Representation of the Other in International Affairs, you write, and I'm quoting here, the concept of Orientalism refers to the distorted manner in which Eastern people and cultures are often viewed by the West. Despite long awareness of this tendency, it persists in modern media. Now, this could be true of many Eastern countries. It's also true about the Balkans. I just heard it the other day. The Balkanization of an issue is something that they use oftentimes in the United States nowadays, and it's not a good way to be exemplified. But my question is, do we have our own fault for that? And how do compare leadership skills between countries in the Balkans and countries in the West?
That's kind of a shift away from the past topics. However, the connection between them is that it's the same drivers. Often when you look at international relations, it's meant to be something. When you look at great power politics, it's what they talk about, real politics. It's politics without morality. It's just what's good for the country. And politics at that level is ideally supposed to be done without emotion either, but we're all human. And we have a tendency to demonize people who are on the opposite side. And the problem with that, even now when we look at the Ukraine war, the politicians on both sides are playing a political game, but they and the media, they drive up emotion to build up the support. And the danger of doing this is that when you build up that emotion, it's very difficult to put that genie back in the bottle. And using emotion, negative emotion against others as a tool, it's ultimately harmful to yourself as well. And so part of that, trying to deal with these problems of Orientalism and other things, is building up a proper open emotional communication with the people on the other side. The people that you disagree with are the ones that you most importantly need to communicate with. So I don't know if that answers that specific question. Does. I don't want to go too deeply into that topic because it's slightly removed from what we were discussing before.
Yeah. Could you give me your, I know that you're taking some notes as you hear speakers here, something that strikes you and that comes to your mind after this discussion.
So somebody was mentioning that the importance of mentoring, and for young women, that when we look at women in organizations, we have to remember that they deal with promotion and advancement in a different way that men do. They can't look at them going on the same track. For men, the financial reward is what they've been raised to look for, to hunt for the big money. And for women, it's different. They want recognition of their talent and their skills. And there was a survey in Japanese female politicians and about the harassment they received in politics. And they found that they get twice as much general harassment as men, 10 times as much violent or sexual comments, and 30 times as much comments that focus on gender. But in response, the women politicians created a video to share with the male politicians about a young lawmaker entering politics and the difficulty she received from these kind of negative comments. And the response from many of the older politicians was, I never realized it was that bad. We thought it wasn't so serious, but the problem there is that men deal with these comments in a different way. They've been taught to shut down their emotions. They develop a thick skin. They don't communicate emotionally as much as women do, so they're not as vulnerable to this kind of negative impact.
So they perceive them differently.
Yeah, they think it's not as serious a problem as it is.
Yeah.
And when they realize it is a problem, then they recognize we need to do something about it. So for me, one issue with, as an academic looking at political issues, I often worry that politicians look for the quick answer because they have elections coming up. They need to build support. They need to show this is what I've done. And often deep changes take a decade. And for me, the key issue is this type of emotional communication, understanding the other side. We spend so much of our time in school, all of us, I'm sure, studied algebra and geometry, and how often do we use that on a day-to-day basis? And we look at things like love, friendship, family, parenting, loss, death, addiction, loneliness, things that devastate our lives. How much time do we spend in school studying these issues, understanding how they're going to affect our future, how they'll affect our family? Not so much, perhaps. That kind of change would take 10 years maybe to have an impact, but an investment in that kind of emotional education, I think, would have huge dividends. So that's what I was kind of...
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. All right, so we have about 8 minutes left till 12:30, so I'd like to give it one more round to each of you, and let's try and split that time. About a minute each. Ms. Gjonaj, one last message addressing this conference, talking about leadership, about enabling women to take more decision-making positions in our societies. What's your message, final message in this panel? With Mike, please.
Very difficult in 1 minute, but I think that we are working together with the other MPs to be together in the fight, in a fight against domestic violence, in fight for empowering the women in politics, in fight for even some small initiatives, but that can change the real life of the women. And I think that if we will be together, if we will be more women in the room or in the table, if we will have the same legacy to work together, then I think that we can implement and we can strengthen our voice and our mission, what we want to do in politics and in leadership position. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was only 40 seconds. Excellent. Thanks.
I would do disservice to Western Balkan if I don't, first and foremost, thank them for putting together this conference. I know what it takes to bring people together, especially people from multiple countries. So thank you so much for your hard work, for putting this together, and for bringing diverse voices into the table. Thank you to the partners for making possible the work of Western Balkans in terms of delivering this impact. And for me, I think the only message for conferences of this type, but also for our reality, is it goes by this African proverb that says, strangers are just the friends you haven't met. So don't be shy, go out there, meet one another, share stories, and find ways to build bridges, because I think they are the true connectors, but they are also a bit of food for our heart. Our mind sometimes dictates something else, because it's always that go ahead, move forward, but build some bit of nutrition for heart, because we also need to breathe. And just like my colleague here said, sometimes it's good to stop and just pause for a moment and reflect. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Deputy Minister Isaki.
Blindi, thank you. I would like to thank Western Balkan Fund, MFA of Japan, and International Visegrad Fund for organizing this conference and enabling us to share some of our views. I would like to say to all the women that they are fully supported to participate by having access to all opportunities and resources. And in conclusion, I would like to end with a timeless quote from
US President John F. Kennedy, who once said, "It's time for a new generation of leadership to cope with new problems and new opportunities, for there is a new world to be won." Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mrs. Wawrzyk.
Thank you very much for this invitation and possibility to be here and to share with you all experiences, opinions. I would say at the end that we cannot have better future without having a large spectrum of visions and perspective. And this can be only possible if we have enough women and women vision, which is very often different than men. And only in this case we will have fair governance of our countries, and our interests would be respected. Coming back to my role of the Deputy Executive Director of the Visegrad Fund, I'm inviting you once more time to consult our website, visegradfund.org, to study our grants line, and I invite you strongly to apply and to meet on Visegrad path again. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really difficult to say anything more than what we heard already, but again, from my experience in working with survivors, I can say that what I thought was to put myself into other people's shoes. So I think that if we do that and try to really reflect from other people's perspective, that we could gain a lot of things, not better understand and reflect other people and their needs, but also ourselves. And it can really contribute a lot to our personal growth and also to our wise decisions and actions.
Excellent, thank you. Mrs. Jovanovic.
I try to be a bit technical because, again, I fully concur with all said. So to have more leaders, or at least more equality and more female leaders stand out, we argue for technical programs to be provided as support to them to do so. An example is the law on cadastre that we changed in 2019 in Serbia to improve the position of married women, meaning that married couples, when buying a piece of property together, from that point on, it's entered into both their names as joint property. Prior to that, women had to go through a nightmare when getting divorced to prove that they had a role in getting this piece of property, that they invested in it, even if they didn't work or didn't have a loan taken in their name. So we need this kind of programs that will be the backbone of female equality and leadership. And we need such program in politics as well to support female leaders in city councils, leaders being heads of offices, of agencies, or being number 2 all the time and never getting to that top position. So we need to grow them stronger. And we need equally such programs in the area of parenting, so that there are joint parenthood programs and campaigns so that mothers, working mothers, can be relieved of all family duties that are usually considered their burden and role. And we need institutions like kindergarten, schools, support institutions that will be available and at a cost that is affordable, so that women can, again, have more time to work on what they want to be and how they want to grow. And most importantly, from our perspective, the same applies in the area of economy. So we need more economic programs to support women. Public procurement that is gender sensitive, that is also taking into account women-owned businesses, interest-free loans, economic programs with part-time employment for rural women. So this kind of tangible programs as support for all those that have the potential, they don't have a voice, so they rely on us to speak for them and to make it happen. And I hope we will. Thank you.
Thanks. And Professor Gray.
I would just like to highlight again the importance of reaching out to all parts of society to try and build a consensus. And that applies as well to the people who might be hostile to your ideas, the people who might reject them, the people who might display anger towards them. Because if they're doing that, these are not happy people. These are people who have emotional problems or some difficulties. And by engaging with you, they can probably become better if you can overcome those barriers. And when we talk about removing barriers, it's not just barriers for women to advance, it's barriers in society that women can help bring down. And I hope that's something that we can contribute to.
Well, thank you for this round of applause for our entire panel. Thank you very much for all your thoughts and experiences shared with us. Next is a meetup session happening right here. And it's going to be facilitated by Edlira Joni, Kaltrina Ajeti, Tanja Tomic, and Amra Smriko as well. So thank you very much for your attention, and have a nice day forward with the conference. Thanks.